560 The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. Your official Chicagoland weather forecast from the 1 Hour Heating and Air Conditioning Weather Center. Partly sunny, warm, humid, high 85. Currently 71. Next news coming up at 8. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560 The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by Real Estate Revealed with Randy Barcella, Sunday mornings starting at 8.
When you've got questions, he always has an answer. It's Sean Hannity this afternoon at 2, right before Joe Walsh at 5 on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. We're coming to you live from Joe Cotton Ford and Carroll Stream. We're kicking off ticket sales for our November 2nd Freedom Summit, that annual extravaganza of conservative intellectuals, and we've got a great lineup again this year.
Yeah, Michelle Malkin, Sean Hannity, Lara Logan is going to be here, Sebastian Gorka, Molly Hemingway, Rusty Reno, Ed Morrissey, Will Chamberlain. The list goes on. And the event
This guy who
always
scored
sells
100
out.
points in a game?
No, this is Will, not Will Chamberlain of Hewitt Events. But again, it sells out every year, so get your tickets now. Go to freedomsummitchicago.com, freedomsummitchicago.com. And also, we're handing out, going to be giving away a pair of tickets here at Joe Cotton Ford and Carroll Stream. We're here until 9 a.m., so come on down, say hi, grab a cup of coffee, a donut, and we'd love to come and introduce yourself.
Ford Explorer while you're here.
Maybe
grab
jump
that
in
one of those two.
Hotwire, one of those bad boys.
So over the weekend, we found out that MF or Spice, Rashida Tlaib, not so keen on seeing Grandmama after all. Rashida Tlaib explaining why she was not going to take advantage of the humanitarian offer to visit the West Bank and see her grandmother.
I don't know what to tell you. This is a country that has just made a huge error, I believe, and they're going to probably have to pay the cost of it. A number of my colleagues are very much taken aback by this, very angry by this decision. It's unfortunate because, we see Israel as a democracy, as a democratic country, but it's very obvious that they're trying to limit what I'm able to do when I get there. I mean, my goal is to see my grandmother. Again, she's in her 90s. This could be my last chance to see her.
Oh, yeah, her goal. Her hate for Israel trumped her love for her grandmother.
Well, she's going to keep fighting the fight.
That's what she says, huh? Well, she, on Saturday night, they had a thing at a Shabbat in the park where she came together with some of her supporters and got emotional because they love her so much, Dad. She's feeling the love.
Oh, thank you. Shabbat Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. Hello. I should be on a plane to see her, but you all gave me even more love today. Thank you for uplifting peace, love, and justice. Thank you. Thank you for not politicizing what's happened to me, because I'm still a granddaughter.
Yeah, and Grandmama sent her love by saying she hopes God ruins Trump. So it's a nice moment between the two. They really come together around hatred of Israel and Trump.
Maybe they can FaceTime each other.
The ties that bind. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Dominic Green, the critic, historian, and life and arts editor of Spectator USA, who's written on the topic. Dominic, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan. Good morning, Amy.
Morning. So you suggested there is a reason that is just below the surface why Bibi decided to reject the visits of Tlaib and Omar, with that one exception being Omar's.
Yes,
being
yes, I think there is,
grandmother.
and we have to look at the big picture, which is very hard when people like Tlaib and Omar are making so much noise and drama. The big picture is the future of the borders of Israel. Negotiations with the Palestinians stalled years ago. There's divided governments between the West Bank and between the Gaza Strip. It doesn't really matter whether Tlaib and Ilhan Omar visit or not. What really matters is the trade-offs that are going on between President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, both of whom face re-election. Netanyahu in September, Trump, of course, next year. And that's really the context I think we should be looking at.
Well, sure, and it's good. Probably got to be good politics locally in both countries to take out after a couple of congresswomen who are otherwise sympathetic to, more than sympathetic to, back the terrorist-backed, Hamas-backed BDS movement.
Absolutely. I mean, there's an interesting series of events recently. Congress issued a condemnation of BDS, but about a quarter of the Israeli Knesset sent an amazing letter basically saying, well, thank you very much. It's wonderful. That was their word for the support. But really, we think a Palestinian state under the present circumstances is a far greater threat than the complaints of a few college professors or a couple of fringe Democratic congresswomen, which is an astonishing turnout. And that gives a suggestion, I think, about what's really in play here. The Trump administration has moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. It's acknowledged Israel's claim to the Golan Heights. There is whispers that Netanyahu, as a boost to his election campaign, is going to get an endorsement from President Trump for annexing Jewish settlements over the 1967 lines. And, of course, the more President Trump lays down, the more he'll be able to call on later. He's not doing this out of sentimentality, after all. He's a famously transactional president, and the price for all of this is something he may yet collect on, if, of course, he can get the deal of the century and the very complicated two-stage peace and economic plan, if he can get that plan off the ground. And, of course, that hasn't yet happened.
Well, did you hear what Tlaib also said at that Shabbat celebration on Saturday? She said that her mother's heart is going to be broken, but she also called on Americans to reevaluate our unwavering support for Israel.
Well, that's positively tepid compared to what she said previously.
Well, firstly, Americans' support for Israel wavers in the political sense, in that there have been administrations which have got on well and administrations which haven't. This is a client state. This is the small ally on the other side of the world. This is a political relationship at that level. Now, of course, Tlaib would like a complete reevaluation or a reversal, indeed, but there is strategically not much chance of that happening. The Israelis are doing their best to trade off, as it were, between what they need to do and what they can do for their most powerful, crucial patron. And this is a good example. They were prepared to put up with the Congresswoman's visit, and then when President Trump asked them not to, they went the other way on it, because he is the crucial partner still for them.
Over the weekend, 1.7 million, by some estimates, protesters took to the streets in Hong Kong, the biggest demonstration yet. What are the prospects that those protests prompt Chinese military action and perhaps a real moment that captures the attention of the globe in a more significant way than it has to thus far, I'm sorry to say?
Well, I think that there's a very high chance, if things carry on like this, of a violent confrontation between the protesters and either the Hong Kong authorities and police forces, who are becoming more active, or indeed by an intervention from over the border from the Chinese. As with the endless Middle East crises that the United States is involved in, it is not possible to fix the entire world, and you get the impression that the American public does not want to expend blood and treasure fixing everybody's issue. The difficulty in Hong Kong is simply this. What has happened there is, broadly speaking, legitimate. The British gave it back. They didn't create a fully democratic system as they were leaving, but they did leave the rule of law and business according to international standards. The Chinese government have done their best to insert themselves into those processes, but broadly speaking, it's worked out. The young people there are under Chinese government, and they're on Chinese territory. Is the United States seriously going to get entangled in this at a moment when the Trump administration is trying to rebalance its trade relationships, its military strategy, all of these things? This is a very complicated moment. So it's one thing to issue statements of support or sympathy. It's another to get involved. I don't think Americans would appreciate it if the Chinese government started issuing ultimatums about how the southern border crisis, for instance, was being handled. So this is a test, really, for perhaps the hardest test yet for President Trump's attempt to extricate the United States from these foreign entanglements and to try and put relationships on a new footing.
But at least to provide potentially rhetorical support. I mean, it's hard not to be empathetic and supportive of Hong Kongans that are waving American flags as they're rising up against Chinese communists. Unfortunately, though, the reality is, whether it's in Iran or Venezuela or Hong Kong, very difficult to actually consummate one of these popular revolts into, paradigm change, right?
I'm afraid it is, and there's a big difference between sympathy and policy, and the costs involved in this case seem to be very high, and it's inconceivable that the Chinese authorities will say to the people of Hong Kong, yes, go free, do what you want, be completely autonomous. It's just never going to happen. It will be the equivalent of pulling one of the states of the U.S. out of the Union because of pressure from a foreign power. We can, of course, say these is a risk of serious human rights abuses, and the U.S. government has said this about all kinds of Chinese behavior. But beyond that, it doesn't seem to be doable, and that doesn't necessarily mean the United States has lost its ability to act in the world. It means the world is an imperfect and dangerous place, and we must constantly try to reconcile the national interest against the emotional, the sentimental interest, and to say simply democracy wherever it develops is good is to ignore the lessons of the last 20 years. You know, it was democracy that brought the Muslim Brotherhood to power in Egypt, which certainly was not in an American interest. A small democratic movement in Hong Kong runs the risk of endangering a very complex process of negotiating China's rise to power. This is a very difficult situation. So the administration is probably doing the right thing, I'd say, in responding cautiously, in expressing sympathy,